Good morning, McGraw. Good morning, Kelly.
Hi, Tony.
We're going to talk about the Table Rock, but I got to tell you, just in terms of interesting reading, your column on the IHOP conversation and Bill McClellan's I don't want to say it was diametrically opposite. I agreed with some on both, but it was great newspapering to have two columns looking at two different points of that story. It was really very interesting.
Well, they were definitely pretty close to diametrically opposed, and they both started from the same point of view in terms of the question being asked. The question being, what would you have had the cops do?
Right.
And I interviewed a police officer and two law professors who said that was a pretty clear Fourth Amendment violation. There's not enough information there for them to treat those WashU students as suspects, and Bill came to a different conclusion. But as you said, it is an honor to work for a newspaper that believes in carrying such divergent views in its pages, and it's one of the reasons why people should continue to subscribe to print newspapers, because you don't get that hardly anywhere else.
Yeah, no, it's excellent point. What are your thoughts as you watch this Table Rock Branson tragedy?
Well, it was just, it's an awful tragedy, and I think one of the reasons that it resonated with so many people is whether you are a fan of Branson or not as a vacation destination. So many people have been there and have been on those ducks or been by those ducks or seen those ducks or even seen them in other towns. And so, it's the kind of tragedy where people are like, boy, I've been on one of those before. I've been on that lake before. It's a beautiful lake, etc. And when I was down there Sunday for the memorial service, that was one of the things that when I was talking to people going in and out of the memorial service, it's one of the things that resonated with them. The folks I was talking to either lived in Branson, or there was one couple that I met that live in Chicago but have a vacation cabin in Branson and come down there, and it's just one of those tragedies where everybody says, wow, that could have been us.
Yeah. I can't stop thinking about because it looked like a school bus was floating, right, with the windows that you were sort of locked in because there was a roof and a canopy on top and the windows were closed, or the plexiglass or the vinyl windows on the side. I mean, what a horrific accident where you're stuck there with 30 people and you just can't get out.
Well, and here's one of the things that ultimately I'm sure is going to be adjudicated. There's investigations going on right now, and there may or may not be any sort of criminal liability in terms of whether or not somebody made a really bad decision. Well, clearly it was a bad decision to be on the lake. Whether or not it was criminal is something that's going to be investigated. But there's no doubt there's going to be some sort of civil liability, some sort of discussion in court as to whether or not the victims deserve some sort of compensation. I'm sure that's going to happen, and it may play out in multiple cases. And one of the things that will result from that is another serious discussion, and there's been one a few times over the last couple of decades related to these specific vehicles as to whether or not they're safe. And I read a quote from one of the attorneys who won a settlement against a Ride the Ducks after an accident in Philadelphia, and he said something that just really resonated with me. He said, they're vehicles, they're cars on the road, but they don't have all the safety elements that your car or that a truck has, because they aren't 100% cars. And they're boats because they can go on the lake, but they don't have all of the safety features that a boat has. They're neither cars, neither boats. They don't have all of the safety features that either one of those vehicles would be required by law to have. And that's really interesting. And I think that as the NTSB studies it and tries to determine, what went wrong here, I think that's going to be one of the, examinations, is that are these vehicles really safe to be on both land and water? and should tourists be putting their lives in the hands of these operators?
That's a great point. Which the regulators, is it a car, is it a boat, and where is it regulated? It's a great question. I want to ask you about something else, Tony, and that is another feather in the cap of your newspaper, Post-Dispatch. Erin Heffernan, in her story about Uber and this driver who apparently, I guess, is now suspended because he was live streaming Uber drivers. And it gets into this question over privacy, and it goes right back to our governor and the argument of whether or not you have privacy in the back of a Uber car versus privacy in the basement of the governor's office. I do find it interesting that people are mortified that it's legal in the state of Missouri to be broadcasted live on the internet in the back of an Uber, and yet they were trying to make the argument that the woman who was having the affair with the governor didn't have a right to privacy in his basement while they were in the middle of having an affair.
Well, one of the interesting comparisons there is that one involves politics and one doesn't. And in today's political world, if the politician involved happens to be your guy, then your view on constitutional protection tends to change. But when it comes to being in the back of an Uber car, you're not a Republican or a Democrat. You're a human being that is dealing with it. And it's a fascinating story. My colleague Erin Heffernan did an incredible job, and I sent her an email the other day. I hope at some point she writes how I did this story, because as a journalist, I'm fascinated in the strategy and the timing of how you go about getting an interview with the Uber driver. What did she do first? How did she make sure that she got all the elements of that story? As a journalist, I've been fascinated by it because it was incredibly well executed and very well written. But as it relates to a citizen who rides in Uber and rides in Lyft, this sort of thing concerns a lot of people. And states have different laws on recording, and Missouri happens to be a one-party state. It's something that a lot of journalists are aware of and have dealt with over the years, because whether or not it's ethical or not, it is legal. For instance, if I'm calling you to interview you, if I want to record you, I can do so without telling you legally in the state of Missouri. I never do that because I think it's unethical. I think you should always let somebody know whether or not they're being recorded. Uber and Lyft, one of the reasons that this is so complicated for them, I believe, is that they are these new libertarian sort of disrupting businesses. They fought being under the state's regulation and the city's regulation, and have been doing that all over the country. They believe they are, to some degree, in their very DNA, disruptive industries that don't have to follow the law that was set up for older industries like taxi. And so I think within their very DNA, it's hard for them to deal with the idea that they're going to have to take away driver freedom now to do something that, at least apparently in the state of Missouri, may have been perfectly legal. But most definitely, you've definitely talked to people. You've had a reaction to the story. People are just horrified that this was going on, and they don't want it to continue.
Well, what's interesting about this, you talk about Uber, being a disruptor. He was broadcasting these people on the internet without their knowledge, and apparently that's fine. But FCC regulations regulate radio industries. I'm not allowed to put somebody on and broadcast them without their consent. So even though I can record them and then write down what they said, right, I can't broadcast somebody without their consent. So it's really interesting how the rules to broadcast somebody on the internet are different than broadcasting somebody on the radio or television.
Well, and here's the other thing about that story that to me is fascinating. There's this whole other culture out there, and I was somewhat familiar with it because I've got a friend who is a gamer, who is one of these people who on this website called, I believe it's called Twitchy, plays his video games and gets paid because lots of people watch him because he's an expert. People watch him play video games, and they comment, and it's like a big chat room, and it's this fascinating little internet underworld that a lot of people were unaware of. That's where this guy was broadcasting, and other people were living the lives of these other folks and commenting on them and being sexist and whatever else they were being in their anonymous little chat room. It's both horrifying and fascinating at the same time. That's part of where our society is in this new age of technology, and it's raising all sorts of questions for companies, individuals, and lawmakers to deal with as it relates to privacy.
The best line in the whole, there was a lot of great lines, but the best line was the kicker, where the Uber driver said, "Don't use my name. People on the internet are crazy."
Yeah.
Tony,
obviously, she did not follow through with that request. Thank you.
Tony Messenger, St. Louis Post-Dispatch columnist with us every Tuesday and Thursday. Tony, have a good week. Thanks.